Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Wednesday, June 12th, 2024, and this is episode 915 of Living Free in Tennessee. We're going to hit 1,000 soon, guys. Just saying. Anyway, today is our last interview show of 2024, and I'm super excited to have Aron Wagner from American Cloud, which we'll get into that interview after the intro segments, but a lot of you are putting off thinking about your digital hygiene, and we're gonna have some eye-opening moments today, I'm sure. For those of you on the live stream, do me a favor. If you want me to see your question, put the word question in all caps so that I will know. Otherwise, I have lots of questions for Aron today, so no worries about that. Okay, before we hop into the interview though, and hear about what he's doing with American Cloud and on the topic of digital sovereignty in general, I want to thank our two sponsors. The first sponsor today is John Pugliano of the Wealth Studying Podcast. John came into my life early on after seeing me present about hollow roast coffee. He was like, let's do something. And then we didn't do anything for a long time because I did not add sponsors to the show for a long time. But he was one of the first sponsors as soon as we rolled out that program. And he's got a great podcast. His episodes are about 15 minutes long. And if you aren't ready to invest yet, but you know that you're going to need to invest one day, it's a great podcast to listen to because it's in digestible segments where you can learn about investing, how he's making decisions and growing his own money. And John loves growing money. So it's a great way to be ready to invest when you're ready to invest. And if you're already investing, I love his approach to how he analyzes opportunity. You can find out more about that at investablewealth.com. Just go there, click in the upper navigation. You will see the word podcast. You can check that out. He also has a pretty good book called The Robots Are Coming that he wrote years ago that is now, with AI and everything else going on, it's a pretty, he saw things before some of us did. We'll just put it that way. Our second sponsor of today's show is EMP Shield. It turns out I wish I would have had an EMP Shield on my fence charger this week. EMP Shield has a device that protects your whole house or your whole car or your whole camper or your whole solar system from such unexpected things as lightning strikes, for example. So our fence charger got hit by lightning the other day. And actually, no, it didn't make sense to put a $250 to $300 device on my fence charger. But because of that strike, the goats got out and then they got into things and then they ate things. And had I had an EMP shield on there, the fence charger would still exist. I am putting one in my house right now because we have lightning strike problems. Obviously, I'm actually super thankful it hit the fence charger and not my house because my EMP shield is on the way. If you're interested in finding out more about those, go to empshield.com and you will get $50 off if you use the coupon code LFTN for Living Free in Tennessee. With that, I'm going to bring Aron on to say hello. I mean, he's been here the whole time smiling, but Aron, welcome to the show.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me on, Nicole.
Oh, this has been a long time in coming. We've had to reschedule a few times, but I was pretty excited to see you were my final interview because we get to talk about topics that people don't want to talk about.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be the final one as well. I didn't know, and we can send it off with a good bang, I think.
Exactly. So first, let's start with who's Aron Wagner and how did you end up on sort of the American Cloud project? And also, I noticed that you're pretty active in or passionate about getting people aware of how they can have better digital hygiene and take ownership for their digital world. So how did you end up there?
Yeah, it's been a fun, interesting journey. I just kind of got into it by chance, to be honest. So I started out in the Army. I was an infantryman, stationed in Fort Bragg. I had a great 5-year tour with the 82nd Airborne there. And because of some medical stuff, found that I couldn't be in the unit I wanted to be in, so decided to transition out. And when I was transitioning out, I found the DoD Skill Bridge or Career Skill Program, where I could do 4 months of internship or on-the-job training or apprenticeship while I was still technically active duty. And for that, I was very fortunate to meet somebody I think you know, one of my mentors and business partners, Sean Patrick Terrio, who took me on as an intern during that period. And at the time, he was running a data center consulting firm out of Raleigh. And I really fell in love with the internet. Toured through my first data center, and it, probably sounds a little geeky or nerdy, but it really kind of took my breath away seeing the physical side of the internet, which until then I really had no experience with. I'm a millennial. I grew up with technology, right? Like I grew up from having a rotary phone in my home to like a home computer to then a personal computer. And so I really watched technology grow up throughout my life, but I never really had any formal training in it. And I was a grunt in the Army, wasn't really a techie by any means. So to actually see the physical side of the internet really, I guess, really pulled me in. And then I ended up taking on a full-time role with Sean at his firm, Open Spectrum, and eventually was able to make partner at that firm. And through that experience, I was able to see all the different types of infrastructure providers out there, and I really got to see what I didn't like about them. And really, there were three main areas that I wasn't super excited about. One, pricing didn't seem right. These, especially the big cloud companies, were really taking advantage of companies. Second was on the support side, all these firms that offshored support, and they created these complicated phone trees where it was really hard to actually get help for your problem as either an SMB, midsize, or even enterprise customers. And then the third was really more philosophical in nature, where by and large, as a whole, the infrastructure market was not willing to service all legal commerce and all legal ideas. We saw this, prior to Parler getting kicked off of AWS. There were Pro 2A companies and gun companies who were unable to use, most of the American hosting companies. Alternative healthcare companies were unable to use these platforms that the rest of the market was able to do. And then, obviously, most recently with political speech, we saw social media applications like Parler get just kicked off the internet. And when there's only a couple companies that really control internet infrastructure by and large, it was a big problem in our eyes. And that's what eventually led me and some others to start American Cloud, so that we could provide infrastructure based on the same framework that makes America so great without trying to create any new laws, because we're not a law creating company. We're a technology company. So that's what we focus on. And we're just so excited to be here and be growing. And I appreciate again for having me on to talk about it.
No problem at all. Let's go back to some digital hygiene things. What do you see as the biggest areas where, like, normal Joe that you interact with needs to start making, maybe take some steps to be a little less vulnerable? Like, what are the big vulnerabilities that most of us are just kind of like, la, 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 la?
Yeah, it's not easy, but I think we need to, like, as individuals, be okay with being a little uncomfortable. The first glaring thing that I'm guilty of as well, and one thing we all can do better, is we need to be better about reading those terms of service before we check that box and sign up for a service. Because most of the time, especially with social media applications, but a lot of the applications that you're putting on your phone and agreeing to those terms of service, you are signing away all rights to your privacy. You're giving that application access to all the background data on your phone. And then that application can then sell that data or use that data for their purposes and not for your benefit. And sometimes that's masked with, advertisements that are catered to your data portfolio. And so maybe you're getting served ads that you do like. and maybe you're willing to make that compromise in that instance. But we've kind of seen now how that timeline plays out, especially with Google and using people's data to kick people off their product suite. We've seen businesses and individuals having their private documents in Drive scanned, read, and then completely wiped out with no way of recovering that information. So, that's kind of a long-winded way of saying be careful what services you're signing up for. And when you're signing up for a service and it's free, it's not free. And we've been kind of on the trail now for a couple of years talking about these free services aren't really free. You are the product. Your data is the product. And it's worth it to spend a couple dollars a month to host your own data and own your own data. And there's software that can allow you to do that. And you can put that on your own devices, whether it's an open source mobile phone, like I know Sean sells those through Mark 37 with Graphene OS, or a Linux laptop. And then there's software like Nextcloud, and there's all sorts of different file storage software that you can actually own. You can own your own repository, you can own your own data, and you're not sharing that then with some provider that's going to use that data for their own purposes.
And what about folks who are like, yeah, but my grandmother, dad, whatever, can't figure that stuff out?
I think it's becoming increasingly more accessible. There's no doubt that the usability is still an issue. And the market is so big and there's so many different open source tools out there that it's hard to kind of decipher what to use and when and how is grandma going to use this tool. And that's where I think, folks like myself and like Sean with Mark 37, who can really be ambassadors and representatives of steering people to use tools that are usable and don't require an additional amount of technical knowledge to use. The one that I mentioned, Nextcloud, is a good example of that. There's, open source word processors that, like LibreOffice and OpenOffice, and these things just kind of work the same way that they would work if you were using Microsoft Word or Excel. And so it's just a matter of getting the right people introduced and kind of getting the education out there so that, grandma's not out there searching Google for a solution and then, inevitably putting malware on her device.
Gotcha. Okay, so American Cloud, are all your data centers in the US, or do you locate outside of country?
No, we own one data center. It's in the United States. I guess our background and what led us to American Cloud, it actually really predates me even. One of my business partners started an audio stream and video game hosting company about 22 years ago. And that business grew. And as that business grew and he acquired more servers, he found himself as the largest tenant of somebody else's data center. So about a decade ago, decided to buy his own real estate and retrofit that warehouse into a 71,000 square foot data center on the West Coast. And, we have over 1 million IP addresses, which is another finite resource. We've got 4.5 megawatts of power, but everything's here in the US. Our staff's here in the US. I do have one software engineer in Canada, but I kind of joke that he's more American than most of us.
Confession, my stuff's hosted in Canada because
well, we got to change that. Actually, Joe.
No, it's there because it's harder for it to be subpoenaed.
Uh-oh, I lost you.
Oh, really? Oh, well, I'm still here, but my internet may have gone out. Did something happen?
Yeah, you just came back.
Okay.
You're about to tell me why it's hosted.
It's a legal reason.
Okay.
So I used to work, I guess you probably do know, I used to work in policy. So on the political side of things, because that's how I know Sue. And we know each other because of Sue. It's harder to subpoena it out of the country. So there's this thing where it's nice to have stuff in the US, but sometimes you want it co-located somewhere else. Um, and I will say this, having been through the moment where Parler was pulled offline, Trump was kicked off all the social platforms, and seeing how much warning they gave guys, you may not think that your little blog or podcast or farm project where you are willing to talk about personal freedom and show people how to build freedom in their lives is at risk, but at some point it is. And what we see happening right now is getting strikes or getting pulled down for things people said 5 years ago. And part of why I wanted Aron on here is I don't believe that's what American Cloud is about. Is that a correct? You're not going to go through and, like, let's say I move all my websites to your system and my audio hosting and all of that. You're not just going to be like, man, I don't like what she said because she thinks that Biden should win the election. So boom, she's out.
Yeah,
that soundbite's going to be taken out of context somewhere, I'm sure.
not by us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely not us. So, I guess the best way to kind of play through that scenario is play through the worst case scenario. And what's beautiful about America is the framework. And if it's applied the way that it's intended to be applied, then there should be due process, right? And so as a hosting provider, in the United States, obviously we have laws to follow, and there are institutions that enforce the laws, especially internet policy. Like we have the American Registry for Internet Numbers, we have ICANN. There's obviously the Department of Justice, and then there's local and federal law enforcement, obviously. But what that doesn't mean is that some rogue sheriff or rogue DA can send us a subpoena and just grab your data. There's a legitimate due process that's required in order to in order for anything to progress forward. So if we were to get a subpoena for access to data, the first thing we would obviously do is notify the customer and say, hey, the subpoena just came in. And then we're going to vet that the subpoena is real and that it's not just some rogue agent. And obviously, the customer, I'll just say it's you in this scenario, you're going to know what's going on, and we're going to be transparent about the situation. And we are not going to be making legal determinations, because I'm not a lawyer. I'm a tech CEO. And so that means that you're actually, as the customer, going to bear some responsibility there. We're going to say, hey, this is happening. You should know about it. Take care of it, right? And we don't know each other very well, but it's my suspicion that you're not actually doing anything illegal. So it wouldn't be a problem. That being said, illegal things do happen on the internet, and we don't want illegal things to happen on the internet. There's a lot of terrible things that happen on the internet, especially with human trafficking. And there are ways where in that sort of kind of worst case scenario, where we can actually, help kind of stop some of that stuff in a legitimate process. And that's a good thing. Like, that's not a bad thing for human trafficking to be stopped.
Yes, it is a good thing. Speaking of human trafficking, my next question is about payment processing, which I know you're not responsible for, but you talked about working with some of these alternative healthcare providers and things that were already getting told they couldn't host places. And one of the things I know about where it can be hard to get payments processed and hosting are firearms companies. Mm-hmm. Do you have just different partners in this realm that you can recommend for people for things like that? Because I actually know somebody right now who Their product is emergency medical kits and training for emergency medical. And they've had some trouble with a payment processor because of unrelated to what they're selling issues, but related to somebody saying something on their own personal place.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, it's extremely unfortunate that that's the world we live in, that people can't voice their own opinions, and then there's ramifications for the business. Second, yes, we have not only do we have lots of partners, we have recommendations on who to work with. You know, it's one of the things that we had to think through when we were building our product and making sure we're not just, you know, another business in the wake of Stripe where they could, you know, try to hold some influence over us to turn off one of our customers. And so we do have experience there. We know which payment processors are better to work with, which ones are okay with higher risk industries like firearm payment processing. Off the top of my head, I know FortisPay has been very good in that space. I know several gun companies that use them. They have a pretty good technical stack. And then we've got a handful of other more bespoke processors that do have technical capabilities. So if anybody needs a recommendation, you know, feel free to ping me anytime or ping us at American Cloud, and we'll help get you introduced to the right people.
Yeah, we've noticed just in our network of people who have small businesses, in particular, as they grow, they're running into problems with PayPal,
Yeah.
which we throw PayPal on there to let people pay because it's easy and people just have to remember their username and password, right? And then next thing you know, PayPal has 50,000 of your dollars that they won't let you have because they've decided that your volume is the right volume anymore, or you know, for whatever reason. You don't necessarily know the reason. You just know that all of a sudden they need more documentation from you, or you don't get your money. Or I've had it happen where PayPal said, until you can prove you've shipped all these orders, you can't have your money, which you're using for the base ingredients to ship your orders. And I had to learn, you know, early on not to have them as a primary dependent because they will do that. They're just like, MIP, nope.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes
They're
your
one of the
recourse
worst.
is there is no recourse. Like they don't ever give you that $50,000.
No, they just hold on to it,
Yeah.
and Stripe does the same thing, and it's absolutely insane. So, you know, it's imperative for a business to operate to have the ability to have cash flows. And so definitely PayPal and Stripe are not friendly in the space and freedom forward. And so there's two thinking processes. There's the at-risk companies, which absolutely need to not use payment processors like PayPal or Stripe. But also, there's just any one of us tuning in who's just in values alignment. Why give your money? Why give that percentage of your cash flows to a business that's antithetical to your beliefs as an individual if you're a business owner? And I would say it's also imperative for you as a business owner to not choose to use PayPal or Stripe. And you know, I mentioned Fortis being pretty good in the payment processing space. Goat Payments is also very good, very values aligned. There's a host of them out there that are there. They're just not, you know, they're maybe not on the first page of Google index results. And you know, then I would say we'll stop using Google to search for stuff on the internet.
Yeah. You know, as a former web developer, the reason that we were guiding towards those, and my full confession, I am using both Stripe and PayPal on Hollow Roast right now. Um, I'm actually walking away from. I'm in the process of unPayPaling all of my stuff because of some of other policies they have too. But we would push people in those directions because they were easy to use, and we needed something that was a per transaction for the customer. That's a per transaction fee rather than this is your annual subscription and blah 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 blah. Funny thing is I used Fortis years ago at a totally different company when we set up their system, and I'm sure they've changed a ton since then. But that's why we've gone that direction and still go that direction. When your volume is a couple $100 a month, this is a much different conversation than if you're getting into tens of dollars a month. And it's something that can grow with you. Do you know of any good entry level like payment processors, or how can an entry level person start with sort of the end in mind and start with responsible digital setup?
Yeah, some of that boils down into how your business is already set up online or plans to be set up online. Like, for example, in a WordPress with WooCommerce setup, where you're doing your e-commerce that way, there's already plugins for Authorize.net and Stripe, and Authorize.net is better than Stripe, so you can kind of get started there. FortisPay has gotten a lot better, probably since the last time you used it. So there are a lot of easier to use tools now.
Decade, by the way. So I'm sure it's changed a
Yeah,
ton.
they've done some acquisitions, and they definitely have a better product. It's still not Stripe. And I think there's an opening in the market for a processor to continue to do better. Fortis is good. And I'd probably say Authorize.net is probably the easiest to use, especially in a WordPress setup. And then beyond that, it really just kind of depends on how you're accepting payments. Like, are you accepting payments physically at your retail store? Then that's different, right? There's a lot of different ISOs and payment processors out there who have point of sale systems who are aligned, but the list of those is so long. If you're a solopreneur doing a services business, one of my buddies is actually solving this problem with a company called Merchant Mob, where he's processing payments and providing some technology specifically for, kind of like side hustle, solopreneur services type businesses. And so I would look there. I can't recommend him and his products enough. He's one of the smartest people I know.
Awesome. And that related, if we're in the planning stage for our business, what would be the best case scenario? Skeins Girl, what do you mean? For what? For hosting, for email, for a podcast, hosting your audio? What? Because I think maybe one thing to talk about is what service does American Cloud provide, and how does that work for somebody sort of entry level versus enterprise level?
Yeah, for sure. So we're an infrastructure as a service company at our core. So we provide servers, virtual servers, and networks and storage to host any of your business applications. So, as a kind of an entry point, a lot of businesses will choose to use WordPress initially. And so you can host a WordPress site with us. There's a ton of other business software out there, though. And I think, if you're just getting started with a business, I think obviously you need a website. WordPress is a good option with a decent UI. Custom sites also are very good depending on how technical you are. They're definitely more performant. And then it's just kind of a question of, business email, document storage, file creation. We have a customer called Paxmail, who's a values aligned email service provider that has kind of a Google Workspace Lite type product where they provide email, document storage, project management. They have an online collaboration suite, kind of like Google Docs. And so I would point you in that direction. The thing we're not a software as a service company. So we're not actually providing that kind of end user software. We're providing the layer underneath that, the servers and the networking and the uptime to host those applications.
Right, guys. So here's how you do this entry level if you're interested in American Cloud. Is you look at what they provide, And then you reach out and say, what I need to do is this. I am going to do a salve, like comfrey salve business. I'm going to sell them online, and I'm going to need a website, email, a way for my, for people to interact or share documents that are not just sitting next to me on my computer, and payment processing and those sorts of things. And then you ask those questions, and what you're probably going to get as an answer is, these are the applications you can use, or these are the people I can connect you with to get set up on our system. So this is almost like, it's like the chassis of your car. Whatever car you put on top of it, it can be a Ferrari, it can be a VW, like whatever you want. That's how that works. But what it means is at the base level, you won't have the rug ripped out from under you because of something you said on the internet, because of your opinion. And that's kind of what happened to Parler. It was more about where all of their data was, just got turned off with no warning, and then they couldn't have email. And then their domain, I think their domain registrar also said, we're no longer going to let, point people to you who type in your domain name. And it was all done basically at the same time. So there was no way, and with almost no warning. So there was nothing they could do to say, oh, okay, we'll just move over here. It wasn't like, hey, a week from now, we're shutting you down. It was like, bloop, you're done. Where this comes into play for somebody like me, which a lot of you would probably be curious about, is right now, my audio, like the people who are listening to this on your audio podcast, I pay a service every month to host my audio files. I want to move off that service and host my files somewhere. Formerly, before we realized how vulnerable we were, I was going to move that to AWS or Amazon Web Services. And then I say something on my podcast about the shot or anything else I want to have an opinion about, or the bird flu. That's the thing that I'll probably be talking about more this year, I'm going to guess, based on what's happened. And AWS can say, sorry, sucks to be you. All of your audio files are no longer accessible. And so what happens to my RSS feed, which is what brings those files to your phone, for those of you listening to me on the audio podcast, they stop working. It's just like, file will not download. Now, because I'm not an idiot, I have all of my audio files backed up in multiple ways. So could I copy them somewhere and bring them back up? Absolutely. But now that I know that AWS is willing to just turn things off because they don't care to support different opinions or be a free speech environment, I am not going to put my audio files on AWS. I already looked at the price for moving it to American Cloud, and it's very likely I will set up on American Cloud to do this, because I'm also not at the size where I would justify myself in renting a piece of a server, like server rack in a building somewhere, which is what Spirko does, right? I don't go through that much data. So that's what we're talking about here. And that may seem kind of uber nerdy, but as you're setting things, like I did a compromise, and I knew I did when I signed up for a monthly service to host my audio files, because it did not make sense to put audio files on a web server and pay for the data for that by going to this other thing. And I have known for a year I need to get off of that. So anyway, it's actually, I was pretty excited when I learned about American Cloud last fall, because I'm like, oh, once I get through this glut of work, I know where I can put these sorts of things. So what this means for you is something different than what it means for me. But one of the important things it does mean is having a potential partner you can work with who is, pro free speech, pro supporting you to have an opinion, even if they don't agree with it. And, unless you're doing something awfully illegal, like child trafficking or something else, they're not just going to rip the rug out from under you. And that's kind of a big deal. Now, do you do domain name registration and that sort of thing too? Or who do you work with for that? That's the one I always get.
Yeah, we're not a registrar yet. We will be in the future. Right now, we use a company called EasyDNS. They've been around since before Google. Their founder has been writing a blog. I think it's called The Axis of Evil. which has been talking about how bad big tech is for the past 20 years. He's great, and their company is put their money where their mouth is and really defended people's rights to keep their domains online. So that's who we use right now. That's who I'd recommend. I also know one of the sister companies in the space that's kind of providing freedom-based infrastructure called Patmos did just get accredited as a registrar. I don't think they have like an online domain registration service yet, but I do know that they're accredited. So that's another possibility. But for sure, EasyDNS is great. We like them. And that does bring up a good point about what we're not. So like we've already talked about, we're not a payment processor. We're not a DNS registrar, and we're not a content delivery network. We're not a CDN. And those three areas, I think, are an opportunity to create a difference eventually. And we would like to fill those roles. It just takes time. And, a content delivery network requires having dozens or hundreds of data centers around the world. And we don't. And what's really important to us is that when we say we're offering cancel-proof services, that we really mean it. We own the dirt, we own the building, we own the security perimeter, we own the servers, we wrote all of our own software, so that every product that we are offering, there is no outside vendor influence that can pull the rug from us unless we pull the rug on you. And so that's why we don't just colo in somebody else's building, because we want to be very honest in the way that we're doing business. We think that's important.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's also important to know what you're not, guys. And trying to be all things to all people is what I've, like back in the day when web hosting was a box in your garage, which was a thing. I remember businesses trusting their whole websites to somebody who was running a box on a DSL connection literally in his garage.
Oh yeah.
And then the inevitable happened in that scenario. Like I was working at this business and they're like, why is the site down? It's like, well, because the box broke in the garage of the person. Like, why didn't you have
it rained too hard?
Something else. But it was just like some kids like, oh, I could host that for you. No big deal. I'm already running all my other stuff. Like no thought put to the fact that, it was an information-based business publishing articles, by the way, like research articles.
Yeah.
But that was part of growing up with the internet too. That, what always got that box in the garage in trouble or that person in trouble is they're like, yeah, I can do the email. Yeah, I can host your website. Yeah, I can do this. Yeah, I can do that. And then eventually they can't anymore.
Yeah.
So when I hear you saying all of these holes need to be fixed or filled, it's not terrible if somebody else fills them, guys.
Yeah, and a rising tide elevates all ships, right? And the more of us that work together with a common goal in mind, the better. And that leaves room for more people to focus on their core competency. So, and that's what we want to enable, and that's what we promote, is that we want to make it as easy as possible for the companies that are hosting their software with us. We want to make that as easy as possible so that the software that they're providing to their customers is reliable. And, that's why, we get on shows and talk about our customers with services that can fill those gaps. I mean, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy there. And I think we generally can do better as a community in supporting each other's businesses and helping them be successful.
Yeah, this is something that comes up at Self-Reliance Festival every time I do one. Our next one's October 5th and 6th, guys. So get your tickets. I had a sponsor, by the way. I had a sponsor come in and give us a donation to bring the early bird price down like a lot. So early bird has dropped to $50 through August 1st. So I'm just going to say take advantage of what that sponsor did because they wanted to make the festival like as accessible to people as possible. But the question always comes up, how do we build the counter economy? How do we build the counter economy? And what people are asking in that situation, or where the fear is in that, is if the economy crashes and we all need to survive still, and part of that means buying things from each other, how can I get my widget, my whatever, right? They can't envision this, and they're like, okay, so we need to build this alternative reality. Well, the alternative reality is already there. Everybody you know in our wider network, and I don't mean like necessarily the FTN network, but in this space, this freedom loving space, who has started something and produces something that you can use, is the counter economy. Like, they're already willing to do business with you now with US dollars. But if the dollar crashes or gets replaced by something else, they're probably going to take that, and or they might be willing to take other currencies as well. It just depends on who they are. They might be willing to trade right now. But if you don't reach out and start using some of these things, then the counter economy isn't as strong. And that's where it can be hard, because things are more expensive sometimes that are handmade than you get at Walmart. Shock, shock, right? Food is more expensive at the farmer's market usually than Walmart. That's because food actually takes effort and inputs to, like, real food takes effort to do. Um, but what I've found by participating in our network's economy is, even though individual things are sometimes more expensive or maybe a little harder to use at first, the long-term value is better. Like, I actually find I spend less to get more, even though I'm spending more upfront on things sometimes, if that makes any sense. I'll find I need less of a thing from a higher quality source, is in essence what happens. So even though the individual thing is, more, I need fewer of them.
Yeah,
I replace them less.
you're getting better nutritional value when you're not eating poison.
Yeah. Yeah, that's 100% true. That's funny. Like, going keto, or like, I'm bordering on carnivore right now. People are like, "How can you afford to do that?" I'm like, "It's actually cheaper
Yeah, I only
because
have to
I'm
eat once
just
or
not
twice
as
a day.
hungry." Huh?
Yeah, yeah, you only have to eat once or twice a day.
Yeah. But it takes a transition time.
Yeah,
And it is probably not as cheap as I would eat if all I ate was ramen. I mean, I don't know what that world looks like exactly, but I
ramen, right?
I mean, ramen's gone up too, so
Everything's gone up.
yeah,
Everything's gone up.
yeah. So that's
It
my long, like, counter economy thing. Like, don't try to build the counter economy, participate in the one that is all around you right now.
Absolutely, and it reminds me of this is just a rumor I heard, so unconfirmed if true, but I think the underlying principle is worth talking about. Um, and it's with the Parler issue. The rumor I heard was that prior to getting kicked off AWS, Parler was actually hosted on Microsoft's Azure and had gotten kicked off Azure for the same reason they ended up getting kicked off AWS. But when they got kicked off Azure, instead of looking for a hosting provider that was aligned with their values, they just went to AWS, and they didn't have a plan for if AWS did the same thing that Microsoft did to them. It's just a rumor. I don't know if it's true or not, but the principle there is, and with working with this economy now that is here now and is available, is now you have a choice of where to spend your dollars. Is it at the farmer's market? Is it with your neighbor and your local community? Is it with a service provider that aligns with your values, whether it's your mobile phone, or carrier, or hosting your business website, whatever it is? There are now options, which is good. The next step now is making the decision as an individual or a business to use the services and buy local, to make that impact and to raise up the common sense economy, this, the parallel economy, whatever it's being called these days, and really vote with your dollars.
Yeah, it's amazing how much that does to keep things going. So that's just, I don't know. It was kind of a tangent, but it's always the question that comes up, and it's the fear that is addressed. And the other thing is, you can start with one thing at a time. You can do one thing and not do everything, because if doing everything keeps you from doing one thing, then you've done nothing.
Yeah.
But if you do one thing and it goes okay, then you can do two things, and then you can do three things. It's exactly like building a homestead.
Yep.
The way I advise people to build a homestead is not how I did. Do one thing at a time until you have a system, like do chickens and then do the garden and then do whatever, rather than try to do everything in the first year.
Yeah. Chickens are the gateway drug.
They are. Do you have chickens?
Yes, I've had chickens. Actually, right now I don't have any live chickens, but I will have more again.
I don't have any live chickens. That sounds like something unfortunate happened.
The biggest unfortunate thing that happened was out of the last, we can only have 4 on our property, unfortunately, because I live in an amazing place that's not amazing in some ways. But 3 of them turned out to be roosters, and that poor little hen was just getting beat, the tar beaten out of her. So we're gonna do some new chickens soon.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's another thing that's happening in our network is there is a rising tide of chicken freedom fighters happening, because in Tennessee we've had a couple instances out near Camden, where SRF is, of city ordinance people trying to make it so you can't have chickens, or you have to register your chickens. And that is not popular with people who have seen their grocery bills rise, have then gotten chickens to be able to produce some of their own food, and then they're told they can't produce their own food. So,
I mean, like full blown revolt. If I were here when that was happening here.
Yeah.
We live in a relatively urban spot in Florida. We're in St. Petersburg.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a citywide ordinance that you can only have 4, and it's a tragedy. Because in North Carolina, lots of chickens, and guess who never bought eggs? I didn't.
Yeah. Even with 4 hens, in theory, you shouldn't have to buy eggs all that often.
No.
Depends how many you eat a day, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, we're on the carnivore diet, probably.
Yeah. So yeah, depends. It's funny how when you do the carnivore diet, how your taste changes. I'll go weeks where I'm like, eggs taste terrible, I'm not having eggs. And I'm like, all I want is eggs.
Yeah.
So
I love the carnivore diet, by the way. So keep chugging through it. I do it in short spurts. So I'll do 30 to 45 days of strict carnivore, and then I'll do just more keto based, and then I'll have like a month where I'm just a garbage disposal for junk food and eat whatever I want. I'll just kind of cycle.
Yeah. The struggle for me has been that I grow food here, and then when tomatoes are in season, that'll totally put me over the carb count for the day, because I'm going to eat the tomatoes when they're in season. But then I decided, like, in the scale of bad for you, that's probably not terribly bad for you. So that's been the only struggle here. Meanwhile, Tactical, who lives on my property, he's like super strict and never wavers. I saw him, like, it was so fun. Actually, he did waver one time. He was at a Mexican restaurant and he ordered a sweet tea, and I've known him for like 6 years or 7 years, and I was like, "What? Why are you ordering a sweet tea?" He's like, "I don't know, I want one today." And it's like, I've never actually seen you consume sugar the whole time I've known you. So, and he was like, "That wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be." Fair.
Yeah. Stomach probably hurt, and he's probably awake for 10 hours after.
I'm sure it just, I don't know what it was that got him down that road. But so it's interesting to me how many of the freedom like oriented folks are all ending up in that keto sort of carnivore world on one hand, starting to grow their own food, getting their digital ducks in a row, and, starting to do business with each other, even though Walmart has a cheaper option. Have you
Yeah.
noticed the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the veil, has just been removed from us, and whatever the catalyst was that really got any one of us involved, the more you look into it, the more you're just kind of forced into that reality. It would be much more convenient if I could go buy good food from a store, but if I go buy food from a store, it's littered with preservatives, or it's injected with sugar or whatever it is. And that's not good food. That's not good nutrition. And so, when you look into it, you realize that beef is the least tainted food in the supply chain. Then you kind of, start wavering down the beef diet and the carnivore diet. And and like chickens are obviously the easiest ones to raise at home, and so that becomes an easy win. um, and you kind of just start taking inventory across your life, I think, at some point, whatever your entryway was, and you start looking at your digital DNA, and hey, maybe I don't want these pieces of my data owned by these corporations that don't have my best interests in mind. And I know you come from a policy background, and people are now starting to get more involved in local politics, and I think ultimately that's a healthy thing, and it's encouraging, and we need to keep on that track.
I'm trying to find out if we can get some sort of a draft that can be done at the local level to enhance food sovereignty, or like protect people's ability to grow and sell their own food. I don't know if we can do it lower than the state level and have an impact, or have it not be overridden by the state. But I'm starting to go down that road now, because every time a local muni gets up in people's faces about chicken or milk or whatever it is, if the answer is that the pissed off homesteaders network in the state come out and they're like, okay, well, counter proposal, let's just pass this in your area, they're less likely to keep picking on people if there's a pushback that has a negative, in their eyes, negative consequence. And in my eyes, like, the more food freedom, the better. So, the more
Absolutely.
freedom of any kind, the better. So
Absolutely. Have you run into or looked at? There's a newer company called Axe, Decentralized Real Estate.
no, I've heard the name, and that's as far as I've gone.
I met them at in a trade show earlier this year, and was kind of blown away at this. It's kind of like homesteading as a service, almost.
Yeah.
Where they're buying, large parcels of land, 1,000 acres plus, and then they're selling off 10-acre parcels, and helping buyers then, build their own property if they want to live on it, but really creating this kind of like franchise type deal where they'll help you get, like 5 heads of cattle, a couple hundred chickens, a few goats, a couple pigs, and then help you monetize that.
Mm-hmm.
Through selling it, online and locally. It's a really interesting business idea in my mind, because I know what prevents a lot of folks from homesteading or kind of going off grid is kind of the overwhelming effect. And you had a really good point of like, just take it one step at a time. And I think more solutions in this space is a good thing, so that there's more access for people who now want to do that, myself included, to be able to make that jump.
Yeah, it's a big jump. It's a big lifestyle change that I didn't realize how much my life had changed in the last 17 years of doing this, until I realized that other people can go on vacation without major coordination for a farmstead sitter, for example. Like, there has to be somebody here every day.
Right.
And the reason I didn't think about it is I don't need a vacation from my life. And now I actually need to go somewhere for the week next week. And luckily I have somebody here, but I'm thinking, somebody who doesn't have that, the other thing we need is a network of people who can go and get paid to run other people's homesteads responsibly. Instead of you come home and all your sheep are dead because they didn't check the water because it was too hard.
Yeah.
You know,
that's what I really liked about this axe kind of
Yeah.
proposition was they're getting ranch hands into those communities, so that, you know, as the property owner, obviously you're there when you can be, but there is somebody who's available
that's big.
on the property at all time. And those ranch hands get, if I remember correctly, they get a revenue share on the commerce of the sale of, you know, whatever that parcel's producing, whether it's meat or agriculture.
Yeah, that's a really cool concept. I'm gonna have to dig a little deeper into that and check it out. Because everybody's always like, I want a homestead, but I don't know how to get one.
Yeah. It's a lot of things to
Look
think
at
about.
non-ideal properties and you'll find one you can afford.
That's right.
Yeah. So cool. Well, we're coming up on an hour here. Why don't you tell people how they can connect with you and like promote American Cloud and all of that?
Yeah, easiest way, definitely if you just go on americancloud.com and we've got a contact us page. You know, reach out there and either somebody from my team will respond or I'll respond. If you want to talk to me directly, you can request me directly and I'll respond. I'm unfortunately also on social media. So, you know, _ Aron Wagner, Aron with 1A is my X handle. And, or just email me, Aron with 1A at americancloud.io. And I'm happy to pass out my personal mobile number if you contact me first. I'm just not going to blast that on, you know, live.
Yeah, we're not going to send that to thousands of people today. 1,000 randos have your text message. All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show today to talk about this. Hopefully we'll find other ways to talk. It won't be on an interview show like this, but at some point we might want to get you on a Tuesday live too with John Willis, which could be fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, thanks so much for making time today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a blast.
Alrighty, folks, if you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in 2 ways. 1, get your coffee at hollowroast.com. 2, consider becoming a member. Our next member webinar is with Joel Salatin. I think it's the 26th of June at 1:30 Eastern, 12:30 Central. And he's going to talk about homestead time management, which is something that we all need to get better at. Anyway, with that, guys, go out, make it a great week.